The president seems to pride himself on being cool and calm. So why was he reportedly enraged at Israel during the Gaza war, but not at Hamas? He's never really seemed enraged at ISIS or Russian President Putin, for that matter, either. We'll go in depth. New controversy over the Mideast with a report that President Obama became, quote, enraged at the Israeli government for its treatment of Secretary of State John Kerry during the Gaza war. Our next guest takes issue with that categorization and is puzzled as to why the president seems so calm with other countries and crises, writing, quote, in the summer in which Mr. Obama became enraged with Israel, Islamic State terrorists seized Mosul and massacred Shiite soldiers in open pits. Russian separatists shot down a civilian jetliner. Hamas executed 18 collaborators in broad daylight. Bashar Assad's forces in Syria came close to encircling Aleppo with the aim of starving the city into submission. A brave American journalist had his throat slit on YouTube by a British jihadist. Russian troops openly invaded Ukraine, and Chinese jets harassed U.S. surveillance planes over international waters. And Wall Street Journal Foreign Affairs columnist Bret Stephens joins us now. Despite that entire list, which you eloquently put together, the one thing that the president reportedly got enraged about was the behavior, the characterization of the Israeli government.
Right, the dissing of his Secretary of State, John Kerry, who had supported a Qatari plan to try to bring a ceasefire between Israel and Hamas. Remember, the Qataris are some of the major backers of Hamas. And when he talked about a general deterioration, this is Martin Indyk, until recently a top diplomat for President Obama, real deterioration in relations between Washington and Jerusalem. And you have to ask yourself, John, I mean, this is a little country that is supposedly one of our closest allies, has just been hit by a 50-day war from a terrorist organization, thousands of rockets, 30 terrorist tunnels, and yet this is the object of the president's rage, not the Russians, not ISIS, not the Chinese harassing our planes over international waters. It says something about his priorities in the world.
And you point out rage is something way beyond anger.
Right. I mean, anger tends to be specific. I'm angry about this or that or the other. It's passing. Rage is obsessional, neurotic. It feeds on itself. And when you think about it, a lot of the hatred towards Israel has that quality of rage. There's no real explanation for it. Sometimes I wonder if these people think that if only Israel pulled out of the West Bank, global warming would be solved. I mean, there's this kind of obsession with it that is totally out of proportion with its place in the world.
I have the feeling that if the Canadians were launching rockets at Minneapolis, for instance, the president might be a little angry about it.
Right. I don't think he would be going out of his way to explain a long history of oppression going back to the War of 1812 and our own invasion of Canada. I think most Americans intuitively get it, that when your neighbor is firing rockets at you, and not only that, but shielding behind civilians in order to maximize casualties on their own side, there's something deeply wrong with that. And the official White House line has been that Israel has a right to defend itself, but in fact, the pressure has been strongly on Israel to have premature ceasefires. Israel accepted more than 9 ceasefires. Every single one of them was violated by Hamas, except the last one so far, and yet the rage of the president is with Israel.
And the comparison with what the Russians have done, I mean, invading Ukraine, no question, Russian troops are in Ukraine, killing Ukrainian soldiers and just, stirring up the local population. And the president seems somehow kind of complacent about that.
Yeah, and thousands of dead in Ukraine as well. You don't see protests about that. No, as a matter of fact, the president gave an interview a few weeks ago to the New York Times in which he sort of clinically analyzed Vladimir Putin's motives, and then talked about trying to find an off-ramp that could provide a face-saving accommodation for a Russian strongman who is invading a peaceful neighboring state. I think, again, it's a question of what are this president's moral and strategic priorities, and they seem deeply out of whack to me. That was the point of my column.
Yeah, and obviously a lot of people have observed that with this summer where so much of the world seems to be in flames, for the president to be enraged about that one thing seems a little off-putting.
Yeah, and remember, Israel is a democracy. People have a right to say what they would like. Let's not forget that the Obama administration wasn't treating Benjamin Netanyahu so well on his visits to Washington, and yet somehow this seems to be a kind of a one-way relationship in which only the perceived Israeli slights are supposed to matter.
Brett Stevens, the foreign affairs columnist at the Wall Street Journal. Brett, thank you.
Thanks for having me.